מסכת בבא מסיעה דף ק"ה משנה, המקבל שדה מחברו ולא רצה לנקש, ואמר לו, מה אכפת לך, הואיל ואני נותן לך את חכירך. אין שומעים לו, מפני שיכול לומר לו, למחר אתה יוצא ממנה, ומעלת לפני עשבים. Someone receives a field as a tenant farmer from his friend, and this tenant does not want to weed it. He doesn't want to pull the weeds out. And the tenant says to the landowner, what does it matter to you? I am giving you the fixed amount that we said, or I'm going to give you 1,000 pounds of olives. So I'm paying you anyway. So what's the difference if I weed or don't weed? We do not pay attention to that claim of the tenant. He cannot claim that. He has to weed it because the owner can say, all right, fine. You're producing this, sufficient olives and paying me today, but that's for this season. Then tomorrow, the next season that you're going to leave. And now this is my field. And there's going to be all kinds of weeds there. If you don't pull the weeds out now, although it's not having a big effect on you, it will ruin my field for the next season. And therefore, that is part of the deal. That's what's expected to happen. That's what everybody does. Everybody weeds the field, and that's good for the long-term upkeep of the land, and therefore the tenant has to do so. The Gemara continues about other things that the tenant farmer might say. He says, listen, I'm going to reap the field first and harvest everything, and then I'm going to plow it. And once I plow it, that will remove the weeds because you're overturning the soil. And so therefore, I'm not going to weed it now. I'm not going to bother. But you won't have weeds for next year because the weeds will be gone once I plow it. That also is not a valid claim because the owner says, no, I want superior wheat that grows without the weeds. If you leave the weeds in now, the weeds take away some of the sustenance from the ground and makes the wheat a worse quality. So therefore, the owner can say, I want you to weed now while the wheat is still growing. And so let's say the tenant farmer says, listen, you want superior wheat? You got it. I'll buy you superior wheat from the marketplace, right? The amount, however, the 1,000 pounds that I said I'm going to give you, and I'll keep this less superior wheat because I'd rather do that than have to pull out the weeds. It's a lot of work to pull out the weeds. Is that a valid claim? No. The landowner could say, I want wheat from my land, even though, it might be the same quality, the one that you're going to buy from someone else, but there's something special about something that I grew. Right? Anyone who has a garden in their backyard and they grow tomato and it says, this is from my garden in the backyard, feels special. I want my own wheat. I don't want to buy someone else's. So let's say the tenant, he really doesn't like weeding, and he says, okay, I'll weed according to the measure of your portion. Let's say they decide I'm going to give you 1,000 pounds. So this this part of the field is going to produce the wheat for you, and you want your wheat from your own field. I got that. So I'll pull out the weeds from your section. And you'll have the superior quality wheat from your section, and the rest of it, I don't care about having such good quality wheat, and I'm gonna just plow it after, and the weeds will be gone for next year. Is that a valid claim? And the answer is no, because the owner says, I have my reputation to protect, because everybody's going to say, okay, you're going to go sell your wheat on the market, and they're going to say, where's this wheat from? Oh, this is from this guy's, and they're going to say, oh, not such great quality, and then you're going to give me a bad name in future years. I'm going to want to sell. I want to keep up a positive reputation of having high quality wheat. And now, after we go through all this exercise and we give reasons why each of these claims of the tenants is not valid, we go back to the Mishnah, and after all, the Mishnah says a reason because it's going to grow weeds for next year. So what about that reason? Rather, we can actually use the Mishnah's reason to explain all of these. We don't need all of these different rejections of the tenant's claims because, in fact, weeding not only helps that year's crop grow superior wheat, but it also helps in the future because there's a saying that says, once the seed falls, it falls. In other words, if you leave the weeds in there, then their seeds are going to spread. They're going to go into the ground, and then that's going to produce a lot more weeds the next year. And therefore, it's important to pull the weeds out early on, right? As soon as they grow, you pull it out before they get a chance to drop seeds. And therefore, that claim is stronger than all of these and actually covers all of them. So, in fact, the tenant has to do whatever the usual custom is. And if that's the usual custom that you pull out the weeds, or early on, then he has to do so. Next Mishnah, המקבל שדה מחברו ולא עשתה. אם יש בה כדי להעמיד קרי, חייב לטפל בה. If a sharecropper receives a field from a landowner and the land does not produce hardly anything, and so now the sharecropper is like, this land is nothing's happening here, and he doesn't want to work it. So what's the threshold? How much does it have to produce that would be sufficient that he has to work it, and how much, if it doesn't produce that much, then he does not have to work the land? So the answer is that if it produces a pile, enough to form one pile of grain, then he has to work it. That's the opinion of Tanakama. We'll see the reason for the pile is because of the language that's included in their contract. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, "Mai kispa b'chri, ela im yesh ba kedei nefila." But Rabbi Yehuda says, what a kiri, a pile? How much is a pile? That's not an exact amount. And what if it's a big piece of land or a small piece of land? So that's either he disagrees. Rather, it has to produce enough that you can have seed for dropping to sow it for the next time. It has to produce at least that much that you can. It'll have enough wheat that you have enough seeds to plant it for the next season. If it's less than that, then it's actually just losing money. But at least if you have that, then you have a chance to restart the next season. Tenor Banan, המקבל שדה מחברו ולא עשתה, אם יש בה כדי להעמיד קרי, חייב לטפל בה. שכך כותב לו, אנא עוקים ועניר ועזרא והחסור, ועמד ועדוש ועדרי, ועוקים קריה קודמך, ותתה אנט ותבטול פלגה, ואנה בעמלי ובנפקות ידי palga. Braita explains the Tanakama that says, if someone receives a field from someone else as a sharecropper and it doesn't produce much crop, if it has enough for a pile, then the sharecropper still has to go and take care of it, and they split the difference according to the ratio that they agreed upon. Because this is what it says in the contract. The sharecropper says, "I will stand and plow and plant and reap and bind and thresh and winnow, and I'm going to make a pile for you." That's the key. Karya kodamach. So that means if there is a pile, then that's the agreed upon terms. There's enough for a pile, and therefore he says, you come and take your half, the landowner takes his half, and the sharecropper also takes his half for the work that he put into it, and therefore that's sufficient. Now, how much is this amount, the enough for a pile? It was there's big piles and small piles, so it has to be big enough that the winnowing shovel can stand in it. That you stick in, here's a winnowing shovel, you stick it in and it will stand. So now when it says that winnowing shovel, which way are you putting it in? Are you putting the blade in and the stick is sticking out? A relatively small pile can hold that up, but the other way around, if you stick the handle in and the blade has to balance the blade, then it would have to be a bigger pile. So which way is it? Tashema amar Rabbi Abhu ledidim mefashali mined Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina kol she'en kones shelo ro'eh penei hachama. So Rabbi Abhu says that Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina explained to me that it means that the blade cannot see the face of the sun. So it's blade in first, and no part of the blade can be seen. It's all under the grain. Itamar Levi amar shalosh sein deber Rabbi Yanai amere sa'atayim Marish Lakish sa'atayim shamru chutz mina hotza'ah. So other opinions, Levi says a pile is at least 3 se'ah of grain, and the school of Rabbi Yanai says 2 se'ah of grain. Rish Lakish says that when we say 2 se'ah of grain, that's after deducting the expenses. So 2 se'ah has to be the profit. Tenan hatam, perisei zetim v'anavim bet shamayim metami'in u'bet Hillel metaharin. If we, as Mishnah in Masechet Okasin, that says bad grapes, bad olives that are hard and not getting ripe, and grapes, Bet Shammai says they are susceptible to ritual impurity as food. Food is more susceptible to tum'ah than other things, except for liquids. Liquids are the most susceptible, then food, and then vessels and other items. So even though these are hard and not very edible, Bet Shammai still says that they are somewhat edible. However, Bet Hillel says that they are not edible, and therefore they're not considered food and do not become tameh as food. My perisei zetim. What are these unruly olives? Amarav huna rish'aya zetim, evil olives. Evil just means that they're bad in that they don't produce oil when you squeeze them. Amarav Yosef, umay kera'a, ubnei perisei amecha yinasseu la'amid hazon v'nichshalu. We see this word perisei in a pasuk in Daniel that says, the children of the wicked among your people shall raise themselves up to establish a vision, but they shall stumble. Some evil leaders that will try to come up, maybe referring to some of the corrupt Kohanim Gedolim that were around during the second Bet HaMikdash. Okay, no matter what, it's talking about evil people, so that's the same word. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar mehacha veholid ben paris shofech dam. Yechezkel, when he's talking about when a righteous person has an evil son, or the other way around in chapter 18, he says if someone has a son that's evil, a shedder of blood, right, then that person will be punished for their sins even if the father was righteous, and so on. So you see also paritz means unruly. V'chama perisei zetim. Now, how much would you count for it to be? How little oil does it have to produce to be considered perisei zetim? Rabbi Elazar amar arba'at kabin lakora, Rabbi Yanai amre satayim lakora. Rabbi Elazar says 4 kav, 4 per korah. What he means here is a korah is this long beam, and they would take baskets of olives, there's baskets of olives here, and pile them up, put a big stone on top, and then use this lever and put weights on the other side to gain a lot of weight, a lot of pressure on this, and they would leave that for a while until the oil squeezed out and then would drain out into this basin here. So for one pressing of this beam, if you get 4 kav of oil, well, then that's already a good grape. But that much or less, that's called a bad grape. But Rabbi Yanai says 2 se'ah for one pressing of a beam. Now, 2 se'ah is 3 times 4 kav. Now, so that's a big discrepancy. How about But in fact, they are not disagreeing. They're talking about different places. And in one place that you'd put in the first place of Bielazad, they put 1 cord of olives into the press, into the baskets in the first place. And the other, in the Bianai's place, they put 3 cord of olives into the baskets of the press. So since they're putting 3 times as much into it, that's why he requires that you get 3 times more back compared to the Bi'elazar. But in fact, both of them are not disagreeing because they're both the same ratio. Okay, now that we're talking about minimum and maximum amounts, so we're going to talk about other cases where we also see that. Tenor Rabanan. Alu be'ilan shekocho ra ubesuka shekocha ra socha shekocha ra tameh. Now, if you have a zav and someone who's tahor, so the rule is that a zav can make someone else tameh by touching them, but not only that, also by moving them. If you cause someone to move, even without touching them, like if the zav carries something, even if he's not touching it, so something or a person. So here, both of them are climbing a tree, and the tree is shaky. If the tree is not shaky, then the zav is not moving the tree. It's stable, and therefore he's not moving the other person. But if the tree is a weak tree, and every time the zav moves, he's moving the other person, he's causing the other guy to move and causes him to be tameh. Or the same thing if they both climb onto a branch that is weak, so then that will impart tum'ah by moving, called masa. Tumat masa. Hechi dame ilan shekochora. And now we're asking, how weak is a weak tree for this purpose? Amri deber biyanai kol she'en bikaro lahok roba. If the trunk is not big enough that you can hollow out a quarter kav measurement from it, then it's too thin and that'll be shaky. Hechi dami socha shekochara. Amar shakish kol she'nechbet behezyonah. And how thin is a branch that would be considered a shaky branch? The Shakish says that its circumference can be hidden by a fist. If the circumference is smaller than a typical fist, then that's called a shaky branch, and that shakes enough that zav will make the other person tameh. Tenan hatam, in Masechet Ohalot we have a Mishnah. Hamalech bebet hapiras al gabe abanim shechol hasit al adam ve'al behema shekochan ra tameh. Someone is walking in an area that there might be human corpses underneath. So if there's definite human corpses, and that's definitely a problem for someone to go through, they're going to become tameh. But here we're not sure. It's possible there were people that were buried here, but it was plowed over, so there's no no designation where they are. Now, corpse impurity from a Jewish corpse can impart tum'ah by overhanging, if there's a tent, or if the person himself hovers over it. But for that you need a large amount of the body to be there. However, for touching or for moving, even if you have a bone the size of a barley grain, then that's sufficient to impart tum'ah. So if one is walking along and you inspect where you're going and you make sure you blow and make sure that there's no bones there, you're not touching any bone or moving any bone, then you'll be all right. The problem here is that he's walking on stones that can be moved. If they're fixed stones, so then walking on the stones is not going to move them. But if there are stones there that are relatively small and loose, and by walking he's moving the stones, then that stone might have a bone right next to it, and by stepping on the stone he will be moving the bone that maybe he can't see, and therefore he will become tameh. If the guy moves a bone, then he is tameh. So that's the first case. The second case is if a person is riding on top of another human or on top of an animal, but that human and animal that's carrying the guy are weak. In that case also, since the animal is weak, so the guy on top is considered a direct cause of the animal pushing a stone that is pushing a bone, and therefore also causing tumah. On the other hand, if the person carrying or the animal is strong, well, in that case, the movement of the person on top is not causing any change in the gait and the walk of the animal. So there, the animal is just totally, stable on its own, and the human on top of him makes no difference. But if it's a weak animal, then the weight of the human being is considered directly causing the person underneath to move that rock and move that bone, and therefore even the person on top becomes tameh. Now, how weak is considered weak for this purpose? A person whose knees knock against each other when he's carrying somebody else, so then that's considered he's not fully stable on his own, and therefore that's considered the person on top is causing his movement to be stronger and heavier than otherwise would be, and therefore the person on top is considered moving it and will become tameh if he walks inside such a field. And how weak is an animal for this purpose? Any animal that will create excrement because it's of the strain of the person riding on it. The person is relatively bigger, too big for the animal to carry. So then that animal is really straining, and that you consider a direct cause of the person riding it is causing the bone that he might be stepping on to move. And so now we have a law regarding prayer and wearing tefillin, and says the measurement is 4 kav. If someone's carrying that much, then they should not be praying or wearing tefillin, as we explained. L'tefillah mai, detanya noseh masoy al ketefo v'higia zeman tefillah. Pachot me'arba'a kabin mafshilin la'achorav u'mitpalel. Arba'a kabin maniach al gabe karka u'mitpalel. Someone is carrying a burden on his shoulders, and now the time of tefillah came, it's mincha time. He's got to pray mincha. Now, if you put the burden down, then it's harder to get back up. It's not so easy. Once you have it on your shoulders, okay, so then, you can, it's pretty easy to carry. But it's a big pain to put it all the way down on the floor and pick it up. So the law is, if it's less than 4 kav that one is carrying, then it's not so heavy, and the person will be able to concentrate on their amidah just fine while carrying that. But he should put it behind him. He should put it behind his back so it's not distracting, and pray, and then he could put it back on his shoulders. That's sufficient. But if it's heavier than and bigger than 4 kav, well, then that's going to be distracting. It's hard to pray while you're carrying something so big, and therefore you have to put that on the ground and pray, and then you'll have to pick it back up. Litfilin maihi, and what's the law regarding tefillin? Tetanya haya noseh masoy al rosho utfilin berosho. Im hayu tefillin rosesot asur, im lav mutar. Ve'eze masoy amru b'masoy shel arba'at kabin. So they used to wear tefillin all day. So he's wearing tefillin and he's carrying something on his head. So is that permitted? So if the tefillin are being crushed under the burden, and the weight on his head is actually pushing down on the tefillin, then that's definitely not permitted. The tefillin is a holy thing. You can't put something smashing on top of the tefillin. But if not, then it's permitted, right? He's holding something on his head, but it's relatively small and light enough that it's not pressing on the tefillin. So then it's fine. So what is the definition of that? Well, if it's 4 kabin, then if it's smaller than that, then it's permitted. You could just put it on your head and it won't press down on the tefillin. But that much or more is not allowed. Taneh Rabbi Chia, mosi zebel aroshot tefillin berosho, areze lo yisalekem listadin, velo yiksherem bemotna, mipnei shu noheg bahen minhag bizayon, aval koshram al zera'o bimkom tefillin. So Rabbi Chia teaches in a Baraita, if someone is carrying garbage on his head, he's got to carry it out to whatever the garbage pile, and he's also wearing tefillin, then this is not very good. And you cannot just solve this by moving the tefillin to the side so that then he can put it on top of his head. It's not proper to have tefillin next to this garbage, maybe animal waste or human waste or who knows what he's carrying there. And he should not take the tefillin off and tie it around his waist, like a belt. That's not respectful. But rather take the tefillin shel rosh and tie it on his arm where he normally puts the tefillin shel yad. He probably has the tefillin shel yad also. So put the tefillin shel rosh next to the tefillin shel yad and tie it there. That's at least a respectful place to put them while he has to carry the garbage on his head. Mishum debe shila amru afilu mitpachat shelehen asur lahaniach al rosh sheyesh bo tefillin v'chama amar Abaye afilu rib'ah dirib'ah bepumpedita. However, Rabbi Shela was more stringent than this 4 kabin, and he said even the scarf that you usually use to wrap the tefillin is just a small scarf, and it actually is tashmish of kedusha because it's used to wrap the tefillin. Even that you cannot put on your head with the tefillin. It's not respectful to carry anything on your head while you're wearing tefillin. Of course, you could wear a kippah, a hat, whatever you usually wear on your head. You're not carrying it. You're wearing it. That's fine. But the handkerchief, we're not talking about where you're wearing a handkerchief for warmth or as a kippah, but rather you just want to carry it, and you don't have pockets. It's easy to put up there. So that you cannot do. And now, how small is an item that you can put on your head and while you're wearing tefillin? And Abaye's answer is even a quarter of the smallest measurement in pupedita, meaning basically nothing. You can't carry something on your head while you're wearing tefillin. That was just to be disrespectful. If you need to carry something on your head, then you have to take the tefillin off. And now back to the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, "My kisba b'chiri ela im yesh bo kedei nefila." Rabbi Yehuda says that a pile is not a fixed amount. It depends on how big the field is. So you can't just go by just a pile. Rather, we assess the amount that would be required for dropping seed into the field. So if it's a big field, then it would have to produce at least enough to have seeds to seed it for the next season. If it's smaller, then it'll be smaller. So it's a ratio. The Gemara asks, how much is that enough to drop seeds? Rabbi Ameh Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Arba'a Se'in Lechor. Rabbi Ameh Dile Amar Shemonat Se'in Lechor. Rabbi Ameh said in Rabbi Yochanan that you need 4 se'ah of grain in order to seed a land that normally would produce a cord of grain. But Rabbi Ameh himself said, double that. You need 8 se'ah of grain in order to seed a land the size that would produce normally a cord. Amar lehu sabad Rav Chama bered Rabba bar Avu, asbera lach. Bishne de Rabbi Yochanan hava shemina ar'a. Bishne de Rabbi Ameh hava kechisha ar'a. A certain elder said to Rav Chama, the son of Rabbi Abba bar Avu, I will explain to you their machloket, because this is a big discrepancy. One is double the other. In the years of Rabbi Yochanan, the land was fat, it produced a lot, so you needed relatively little seed, and it filled up. Whereas in the years of Rabbi Ameh, which was later, then the land became lean, and you needed more seed. Tenan hatam, a Mishnah in Pe'ah. Haruach shepizera et ha'omarin omdin ota kama leket reuya la'asot v'noten la'aniyim. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer noten la'aniyim kedei nefila. So since we talked about kedei nefila, enough to seed, so here is another time where we have the same amount, the same phrase, and we're going to talk about how much that is. And here is talking about wind that scatters the standing sheaves. And now these, after they do the main harvest, there are gleanings. There's a few sheaves left that it's not worth it for the owner to go and take every last one. They miss a few on the way. And the Torah says you have to leave those over for the poor people to come, like Ruth does. But here's the thing. A big wind came and blew all that away. And now the poor people don't have those gleanings, but the owner still has to give something to them. So therefore we make an estimation of how much leket, how much of the gleanings would this size of a field normally have, and he gives that to the poor. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says he should give to the poor the amount of seeds that drop kedei nefila during the process of harvesting. In other words, Ashbag says you don't have to make an estimation. There's a fixed ratio of this. Now, even though it's the same phrase kedei nefila as before, it seems to be referring to different things. The before was talking about seeds that one needs in order to plant for the next season. Here it means seeds that normally drop onto the ground while one is harvesting. Vekama kedei nefila. So for this purpose, how much is that? Ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Elazar v'item Rabbi Yochanan arba'at kabin lechor. You see, this is opinion of Rabbi Yochanan is different from what he said above, because it's for a different estimation. So he says it's 4 kabin, 4 per kor. Ba'e Rabbi Yirmiyah lechor zera or lechor tebuah, lemapolet yad or lemapolet shevarim. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked for clarification about this. Is it that he needs a cord of seed, a lot of seed that he would then use for a big field, or enough seed to seed a field that will produce a cord of grain? And if it's talking about seed, then is it that if when you're putting sowing by hand or by with an oxen, if you do it by hand, then you could be more exacting and use up less seed because you're putting it right just in the right spot. Whereas you're putting it by an ox, you're just putting a big bag behind the ox, and as it walks, it spreads the seed out. But then there's a lot just going to waste, and that would require more. Tashema dechi ate rabin amar Rabbi Abu, amar Rabbi Elazar, amri la amar Rabbi Yochanan, arbaat kabin lechor zera. Vadayin tiba elach l'mapolet yad or l'mapolet shevarim teko. We can answer the first question because when Rabin came, he said in the name of Rabbi Abu, who said in the name of Rabbi Elazar, and some say Rabbi Yochanan, that when we say the amount, it means 4 kav for a cord of zera. So it's not, in other words, it's 4 kav to seed a field that is the size of a zera. So it's a relatively smaller amount in order to seed a field the size of a cord. Not that you need a cord of seed. However, we're still not sure if it means when one is seeding by hand or with oxen, and we leave that question standing. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen v'amen.